So when people in the media and they all talk about like AR, VR, and metaverse, there's a lot of things and concepts get mixed together, and that's why like even with a lot of advancements in the technology, it feels like it's still not here. Which, considering what your vision of it is, it's not here yet. But if I was to think about this from, is it something that will be useful? Is I don't believe anybody given the choice wants to sit at a desk for 8 hours in front of a rectangle to be able to do computing, or be carrying these 300 or 400 gram devices that are taking them away from social situations. Like you could be sitting at a dinner table and you're staring off into your mobile screen rather than interacting with your family and friends around you.
Hello, everyone. In this episode, I'm talking to Mukul, who is a design lead of augmented reality at Amazon. Mukul shares his career story and getting into the world of augmented and virtual reality. We talk about also inventing new interactive interaction patterns and the challenges of not having the common patterns to rely on. What prototyping tools Mukul recommends to use for AR and VR experiences, Metaverse, and how you can get into AR world as a designer, and much more. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey Mukul, hey, how are you?
Hi, Kirill. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I was really excited actually about this conversation when we booked it, because I'm sure you can share a lot of insights from the inside about a very mysterious, from my point of view, and very, I guess, respectable and really kind of like this kind of in the fog. There's like this almost like a unicorn figure of this AR VR industry and the whole space because I keep hearing this about it, the news and all the trends and all the technologies, right? That's been recently quite active, but I've never really had a chance to talk to anyone who designs these experiences like firsthand. So I will have quite a few questions to really kind of to learn more about this space. So really excited.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Likewise, I'm very excited to be able to be part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Sounds good. So let's start with like some overall questions first, and then in the second half of the conversation, we'll focus on the AR VR and go a bit deeper there. Beginning with your story, tell us why did you even start this? What really drove you into this field, and how did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question and quite a winding story that I have, which is true for a lot of people in AR and VR design industry. So, um, just to give you an overview, I was born and I grew up in India. And as a kid, whenever I wasn't going to school or playing with my friends, I was constantly imagining and building new machines. And these machines would take into account like urban planning, locomotives, even space shuttles. So following this passion, I got into the one of the most prestigious universities in India and followed the path of focusing on mechanical engineering with a minors in computer science. Um, and early on during my undergrad, I got involved with a group of people who were building a Formula One racing car to compete in a worldwide racing competition. This competition is for particularly for college students. So we didn't have the fancy budget, but we did have great aspirations for this. And while as part of this project, like I during the design phase, we spent months and months of building a 3D model of the car, testing it in different simulation softwares, improving every single nut and bolt of this 3D model to make the car go very fast. But as soon as we got into the build phase, I realized that the car and the computer was going to be very different than the car that we were building. Just because that there was a massive disconnect between the computer representation of the car and the physical representation. There was no way for us to exchange information between the two. And that got me very excited and interested into learning about wearable devices, AR, VR, artificial intelligence. And following that path, I decided to pursue a master's in human computer interaction from the United States. So I went to University of Maryland on the East Coast. For people who are familiar with, it does snow there a lot, which was very new and not a lot of fun for me. But anyways, while at this university, I worked as a research assistant in a mixed reality laboratory, and there I gained a lot of the technical knowledge that you would need if you want to be a designer in this industry. More, more and more as we progress more and more, the technical knowledge is needed less and less, but it's good to have that fundamentals. And then when I graduated from my master's, I joined a startup, High Fidelity, that were building a social virtual reality world. We didn't call it the metaverse back then. It's only now that that term has become very popular and part of the mainstream media. Um, but I joined that startup and helped them figure out a lot of the user interfaces in terms of how to kind of break this very advanced, very new aspirational technology to mainstream audience that might have seen a video in a TV somewhere on the news outlet, but when they're actually putting on this VR headset with these controllers, it becomes very hard for them to understand and navigate in. So worked a lot on using like user-centered design principles, prototyping, testing, and product strategy, and really got to sunk my teeth into the classic UX design principles that are needed, even if you're working in AR, VR. They will remain the same across any design job. Um, so that was my journey at High Fidelity. But after a few years, I realized that VR headsets are going to take a while to become mainstream, primarily because of the bulky hardware. And hardware progresses very slowly compared to software. So I knew there was a lot of time. And I started devoting my energy to mobile devices. And as you might be aware of, like mobile devices like the iPhone and Android have these SDKs that allow anybody to build augmented reality apps
Hmm.
for them. So I joined Amazon and helped them kind of figure out what kinds of shopping experiences can we deliver at scale to millions and millions of customers in a very light experience. Because as opposed to a VR experience where people are going in there expecting to learn a lot of new things, when people are casually browsing through Amazon or any shopping website, they don't have a lot of patience to learn new stuff. So that was definitely a big challenge that I helped overcome with the team. And first, in the initial few years, I was focused on helping improve our product visualization experiences. So imagine if you want to buy a couch for your new apartment that you're just moving in, or you're decorating the nursery because you have a new baby on the way. It's very hard for customers to understand how do those furniture pieces fit in their room, like physically, but also stylistically. Does the color of the sofa look good with the drapes or any other furniture that is in there already existing in their
Hmm.
room? So being able to visualize those using a mobile device is very helpful to customers.
Interesting. So it sounds like a really good application, like a really practical application of the technology. It's not like playing games or some kind of entertainment, right? Which personally, I lean towards more practical and practicality. So I really kind of enjoy this I guess idea and feature. Is it something similar? Because I haven't used this one, but is it something similar to what IKEA launched a few years back when there was like lots of hype about this? Like when you kind of really go through their catalog and like simulate placing that chair or sofa in your, I guess, live view of the environment. Is it the same? Is that similar?
A lot of companies, especially e-commerce companies, have launched similar experiences. I would say we have been working on it for a long time.
How is have you designed like any like common digital interfaces like a typical UX designer would do?
Yes, totally. I've worked on a lot of web experiences, desktop experiences, and mobile experiences. Um, both professionally and on personal side projects. So professionally, at when I was at High Fidelity, even though we were building primarily for virtual reality, um, we also had experiences both on desktop and mobile devices, and that kind of came from the general learning and awareness within the company that VR might take a long time to come along. So experiences like Fortnite that everybody is so familiar with now and just assumes that they're going to work on every device imaginable. Um, we were already doing that in addition to having our experiences work in virtual reality. And at Amazon also, when I say it's interesting, like when people think about AR and VR, um, a lot of people only imagine like interacting with objects in 3D. Uh, but if you're creating an experience that can scale to millions of people, we try to keep the AR aspect or the 3D interaction aspect of AR to a minimum because most people are not familiar with these experiences. So if you look at our Amazon app right now, there's a fair amount of 2D UI that we design and implement in order to for the customer to interact with this experience.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So going back to this kind of the two, I don't want to say different worlds, but somewhat different worlds of like a standard like web interface, digital interface design, and designing for AR and VR experiences, right? So because you kind of experience both sides of this world, both parts of this world, I wonder from your experience, what's the easiest and what's the hardest, and what's really the difference? How would you describe a difference for a person, for example, if I am designing experience like normal, like not normal, commonly familiar interfaces, right? Like digital web apps and all that stuff. And if I consider going and switching to AR and VR design, what should I know before doing this? How does it compare?
Yeah, that's a that's a very broad question. I'll try and answer certain different aspects of it. So one of the things that you mentioned is what is the difference between designing commonly known and understood interfaces like a mobile or a website versus AR VR. It's exactly in the words commonly known interfaces, which is people are aware of how to interact with a button or a drop down or a list that they see on a 2D screen. You don't have to reinvent or not even reinvent, but invent new interaction patterns every time you're building a mobile app. You inherit a lot of the work that designers before us in 2009 and even all the patterns exist and you can just pick and choose which ones to build. So that's one major difference. Now, the way you get around this is that while you're generating these new patterns for AR, VR, you'd have to do a lot of prototyping and testing to see if these patterns are understandable to new customers. Another thing that will be significantly different is that AR, VR technologies are still evolving. So a lot of the things that you might want to do and that you see in science fiction movies, like for example, Minority Report, Tom Cruise is interacting with an interface by just moving their hands. That's not possible in the real world. One, because you can't hold your hand for like more than 5-10 minutes for too long. Your elbows and your biceps are gonna hurt a lot.
Can you imagine if we do go this route and you have to interact with the interface this way, how evolution will bump up our muscles in this area for those who are heavy users, especially.
Yeah, that might be. Hey, you don't need to go to the gym anymore for biceps, only
Exactly.
leg days.
Yeah, win-win.
Yep. So that's another aspect, which is like the technology has not caught up to the creative minds of that we have, that every designer has, by the virtue of being in this industry. So what that means in art when you're designing experiences is that you start with the North Star of what do you want the experience to be, and then you meet the engineers halfway, or maybe sometimes all the way to what is possible today. And that could be significantly different than what you had thought about. And then one more aspect of this would be the understanding of 3D space and 3D design is way different than being able to draw like buttons or lists on a 2D Figma file or Sketch for those diehard Sketch fans that are still out there. Uh, but that the understanding of these how are these 3D models created and how are they delivered to the customer, because these 3D models could be several megabytes in size. So latency and internet bandwidth constraints also become an issue and a constraint that you have to work with.
So this kind of leads to one of the questions I had, and you kind of touched on a bit earlier that you have to do a lot of prototyping and testing. I kind of have hard time imagining what kind of tools you use for creating these prototypes. How does it work? Like the whole this testing process as well.
Totally. So that I'll kind of address the larger question, which is it is a lot of people that get that naturally transition into AR VR design come from a gaming background. So game designers have a lot of the tool sets that they're already using, like Unity is a game engine that can be very interactive and you can create prototypes using that. Unreal is another one and focuses on a lot of visual fidelity of the experiences. So those are primarily the tools that I would use to create very interactive prototypes. Now that being said, I've created prototypes in Figma as well, or a 3D software and created a video for low fidelity prototypes that don't really require a lot of time and investment upfront, but then also the things that you can test with those are tend to be lower risk as well. Um, and then finally, there are some new tools that are coming out for AR and VR prototyping. So VR prototyping tools that tends to exist there allow you to prototype while wearing a VR headset. So imagine it's like prototyping VR in VR. So you get a creator tool set where you can draw cubes, spheres, cylinders, place them wherever you want to place them, and almost like a white boxing environment where you can create these environments. That's a fun idea. I had built multiple projects on the side during my master's on how to achieve that as well. And it's a very complex space. Again, going back to like people can't don't want to hold these controllers for too long while they're like interacting with these experiences. So you could sit on a laptop for 8 hours, but you can't be just standing up and interacting with a VR headset for 8 hours. So those are like some of the bigger constraints. And on the AR side, there's also two kinds of AR, so wearable and mobile devices. There's another company called Bezel that is allowing you to do a lot of the 3D modeling on a web browser, and they have a prototype mode that immediately puts those 3D assets in front of a mobile camera. So I would say on the tooling end, it's like pretty nascent, but that's kind of the trajectory of all new technologies when they get introduced. Designing for them is hard.
That's true. Yeah, that's actually an interesting point about it. It's just a relatively new industry, and like lots of things are still like really, really actively changing, and especially on the tools front. And it's good to see that developers and companies invest money to build these tools, right? So kind of to really help grow this adoption of the technology, and potentially like business opportunities to sell more devices or like new devices, right? Uh,
Yeah,
this also kind of goes to my next question, which is particularly VR, right? And maybe AR in some point, like I think AR as well, kind of somewhat related. But with VR particularly, it's been quite a few years already, right? Since the initial like beginning of this trend or wave or curve. And initially, the
yeah,
hype was like everywhere. Like everybody was just yelling that VR is the next big thing, because everybody, especially in the valley, where lots of things are coming out from. Everybody is waiting and looking for this next big thing. What's like next after mobile? And I think they were hoping that VR is the next one. But it's been a few years now, and I keep hearing opinions from like analysts and like tech experts who've been in the industry, like in the tech industry for a long time, that it didn't really achieve that kind of mass adoption, mass scale, and kind of still stays in this more niche application like gaming, and maybe some specialized roles like I've heard some healthcare use is very good, and like some maybe engineering pieces, right? But still not like a mass like consumer kind of product. Still bulky, and obviously it's getting better, which I'm glad to see that like the evolution of this. First, you had to carry like a huge backpack, like with like all the wires, right? Like it's a small backpack. Now, like it's like all like on the belt. Now it's like on the head. It's like getting smaller and smaller. Similar, like we were going through
yeah,
the journey, like I think in the smartphones. Yeah, like I started like with the big ones,
yeah.
like small. Now it's like, um, and
You
I
started
wonder
with a
what do you think?
suitcase.
Yeah,
In the
that's true. Actually,
smartphone era,
yeah, I
there
didn't
was a
have that one.
suitcase.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
me
remember
either.
some old movies. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to hear, because you're like the insider. You kind of you've been in this industry for several years already, like firsthand doing this and really learning and following all these resources and developments, right? So I wonder what's your opinion about this. Like, will it ever become a consumer grade of device, like that will be the next big thing, or it will be more still kind of helpful and valuable for specialized use cases and like more maybe some niche industries like we see today?
I tend to think about this from a human computer interaction perspective, which is when a human is interacting with a computer, there's basically three parts of it. One is the input devices, which currently tend to be keyboard, mouse, or a touchscreen. Another is an output device, which tends to be these like lifeless 2D glass rectangles that we carry around with us all the time. And then the third is the human in the picture, which is the human in the loop. Um, so when people in the media and they all talk about like AR, VR, and metaverse, there's a lot of things and concepts get mixed together, and that's why like even with a lot of advancements in the technology, it feels like it's still not here. Which, considering what your vision of it is, it's not here yet. But if I was to think about this from, is it something that will be useful? Is I don't believe anybody given the choice wants to sit at a desk for 8 hours in front of a rectangle to be able to do computing, or be carrying these 300 or 400-gram devices that are taking them away from social situations. Like you could be sitting at a dinner table and you're staring off into your mobile screen rather than interacting with your family and friends around you. So if you had something that was directly in front of your eyes, it will still keep you in the experience, the real experience of life, without really distracting you from. You don't have to be like stuck in front of a desk, just as we are right now.
Do you think we will need extra devices if this Neuralink chip will potentially be able to hijack all our inputs outputs and just do it all by itself?
You're saying, what if we just live in a vegetative state where we're sleeping the whole time, but we're experiencing this virtual world, which to our brains looks like it's real?
Yeah,
Um,
like all these kind of fantasy movies with like not clones, drones, not drones. There was a movie with Bruce Willis, um, Surrogates, I think it
uh,
was the name. When
yeah,
basically kind of it's like, yeah, you
surrogates.
can choose like any kind of body and like kind of be at home and like just kind of with some kind of device. Yeah, scary.
Yeah, that is something that keeps me awake at night. But also,
Really.
how do we know we're not already in that? Like that
Oh,
we
that's
might already
going
be
too
plugged
deep.
in. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of, yeah. It's. I've heard this first time. I've heard this thought about that we're potentially already in the simulation. Uh, I think from Musk or from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
And I was like, I never actually, I hadn't thought about even like this possibility, because like I'm just a normal human, like a simple human. And it's like now I keep coming back to this idea and like this kind of really accepting maybe that it's kind of statistically possible, but kind of almost also I don't want to believe in this. It's like, like just kind of rejecting this idea that like life is too good to kind of to be to accept this reality if it is. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Talking about
totally.
talking about what you mentioned, Neuralink. Yeah, let's talk about metaverse, right? And again, like because you're an insider, I just want to hear your opinion. Um, and you worked on this before, like on a similar concept before, so you
Yeah.
maybe have some additional insight. Is it really Was it really a good idea? Like, because from what I understand right now, like at least Meta, the Facebook, right? They kind of not prioritizing this project anymore, because like a year ago I remember it was like the next like big direction for the company. Now like I keep hearing some voices like it's actually they're rolling back or kind of really switching to a different like AI now, right? So kind of going away from this metaverse focus, which was like all the rage at the time. So I wonder what your thoughts on that concept, and if it really has a chance to become mainstream.
It's one of those things like what the definition of metaverse is not constant. And it's also depends on what kind of industry are you talking about. So like when internet first came around, nobody had thought that we would have these smartphones and we would get into a stranger's car who's going to drop our kids off somewhere else. Like those applications had not been thought of. And similar to that, like I think the idea of the metaverse is just, to me at least, is like the base set of technologies that allow movement of 3D assets between different locations. And another idea that doesn't really exist with internet just yet is that this metaverse will be persistent regardless of whether there's a user in the metaverse or not. So when you go to sleep in your house, the sun doesn't stop revolving around the galaxy. Like that's going on. In the internet, in the current world of internet, that doesn't happen. As soon as you log out of I would say, well, social networks are not a good example of that because like other users are still interacting with it. But imagine if everybody logged off of Facebook. There will be no change in the state of Facebook data, like it would just halt somewhere. But that's not the case with potentially this idea of the metaverse. Like things will keep on going. And because you have this persistent state, you start to get a lot of things for free. So, for example, you could plant a tree in the metaverse and it will keep growing, and you can play Farmville that way, just very less addictive because you have to wait 30
Exactly.
years for your crops to grow. So that's, I believe, like that concept is very useful. Will it become mainstream? Depends on like what do people want to do. in their world. And then again, it depends a lot on like internet didn't become super big until mobile devices came around. Like it was still very big when laptops and PCs were there, but it's only the ability to be connected everywhere all the time that internet devices and internet applications became very big. So if I was to tap a little bit into like what the mainstream thinks the metaverse is this Ready Player One version where you put on glasses and then you go into this different world where you're studying, playing games, you're interacting with your coworkers. That can exist, but it has the value out of that has to be significantly more than meeting in person. So your 3D avatars have to look very realistic. You have to have the feeling of presence in there. And if that happens, then I can definitely see it being used in localized use cases like work and education, which are still very big. Like we spend almost a third of our lives studying or going to work. Outside of that, it's like TBD.
Would you use it for like outside of the work?
I would if the avatars and the presence were good enough, which is not the case right now. It's definitely a matter of time, and also when we look at the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I believe the one after that, they're spending a lot of time in Fortnite, Roblox, like environments, which are like glimpses of metaverse. And they're spending their time socializing with other kids. They're not necessarily playing a game in there. So when they grow up, they might still want to live in that environment.
That's true, but that time it will be more immersive, and it's not on the screen, right? But in your chip. Interesting. So, thinking from all the variety of different devices and companies who are kind of trying to get to not be late to this new market and new business opportunities, right? Like, I'm sure you've heard that Apple is going to announce something in a few days, right? Um, are you going to their?
WWDC. Well, I said it's. I've heard it all over the news, and I've been hearing it every year for the past 5 years that this is the year that the glasses are going to be announced. That doesn't mean they're not going to do it this time, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. The rumor was every year, right? Like on a yearly basis. Um, what do you expect to see from them? Do you think it will be really a revolutionary um, unveiling of a really cool device, or something not to really, yeah, overhyped?
Yeah. Uh, I tend to lean on the side of overhyped, and the reason I say that is because there's a lot of hardware technology that you can't just improve in a few years, particularly around optics and batteries. So optics really have not changed for thousands of years, and from the first time we created a lens to now, like the principles of bending light do not follow the Moore's law that they're going to change anytime soon. So putting anything on your head that is lightweight while still being able to see the real world, like that's a very hard problem to tackle. And then another is batteries don't last too long, especially if they're on your head, because you can't put a lot of weight on your head. Now, I've heard that they're going to have a pocket computer that is separate from the headset. That can definitely
A
like
briefcase,
improve the experience. A briefcase, maybe, or a backpack.
like the first smartphones, or like not for smartphones, cell phones.
Yeah, that could be the case. So that's like my kind of like cautiously optimistic take on the hardware. Now, in terms of experiences, I think they might have like some very cool experiences as Apple always does when they're launching a new technology. How long it takes to become mainstream is an open question. I think it's going to follow more the route of Apple Watches, which took 5 to 6 years to really become mainstream, where like people started to get value out of them, as opposed to iPhones, which like in year 2 or 3 they were selling like hotcakes everywhere.
Interesting to hear your opinion from the, because you know, like all the technology constraints, right? Like, and really kind of all the really the blockers that like just physically won't allow you to come up with something like really drastically better or different from others, right? And considering that some companies have been already innovating in this field, like on a like monthly, annual basis, with like releasing new and new smaller and smaller devices, but you hit these roadblocks with the lenses and the batteries. Yeah, that's interesting. Uh, yeah, I'm also kind of a bit kind of skeptical, not skeptical, cautiously optimistic, I would say. Not to get my hopes up. I don't think I would be kind of the one who would be jumping uh, right away to buying like a device like this. I'm kind of probably not the right audience for this, at least for now. But I'm really curious to hear, like, just kind of to see it from the. I'm talking about the Apple's release, from the design point of view, and just kind of the physical product design, and if they will be able to match their bar of experience of like the quality of design, like they did with like the previous new kind of type of devices, and really potentially become this new industry standard, right? Like that lots of companies that will just kind of be following their patterns that they defined, and even get like inspiration, and like this can spawn off some new industries who will be building on top of that. So it's kind of quite exciting to imagine if, for example, they can somehow manage to make this new device with the new technology like follow the steps of iPhone, like with a huge industry that it created on top of it, and like become the leader. Yeah, it's interesting times.
Yeah, totally. Like if I think that there's a lot of energy and anticipation on people waiting for that headset. If it is even a headset, like who knows? It is all speculation at this point. But if and when it gets released, I imagine a lot of people will be building for it, just because it's at least from their past track record, it's going to be a very intuitive and easy to use device for consumers.
Yeah, to be fair though, some
Yeah.
of the devices are pretty horrible and very disappointing. Talking about their mouse, the latest mouse edition with like, yeah, ergonomic disaster, and charging also questionable choices for the
Yep.
sake of minimalism and simplicity from just visual look. Yeah, so they're not perfect, but they're still pretty good, like in the product design, pioneering many different ideas and innovative ideas. Okay, let's talk about maybe one more question on the AR VR, and then we'll switch to the kind of interviewing and portfolio and resume kind of tips and advice. So let's imagine there is a designer who has been in the industry of like the standard UX product design, more like web apps and mobile, and if they want to, because maybe they believe that this new world of AR and VR will be the future and will be much more interesting for them to pursue that track in their career, right? What kind of skills they can start building today while still in their job as a designer, as a UX designer, to prepare themselves and to prepare their profile and maybe, I don't know, portfolio for this new job as an AR or VR designer?
It's a question I get asked all the time from a lot of new designers that are interested in this field. Um, and I would say there's no like one answer to it, in the sense like I can talk about a couple things that are necessary requirements to be working in UX for AR and VR, but they're not sufficient. So I'll talk about the necessary ones, and then I'll add some layer on top of that answer. So I would say if you want to work in AR and VR, first start understanding all the different kinds of devices that includes. So building and designing for a mobile AR device is very different than building and designing for a wearable VR device. You just have different input devices, you have different patterns, interaction patterns that you have to learn. So start getting familiar with that. And also, wearable AR devices are very different as well in terms of the technical challenges that you will face if you do decide to work on that. Um, Another one would be like anytime I'm learning a new technology, like start looking at existing experiences on those devices and build an understanding of common patterns that exist or ideas, or start to think about the reasoning behind the way certain things were implemented. That will give you a lot of like the base knowledge that you need to kind of make a choice into which one of these three device types you want to work in. You might want to work in all of them, but at least having an understanding of the differences and the similarities will get you very far. Another one I would say is start being familiar with 3D technology. Now, this could mean getting into 3D modeling using Blender as an open source software, Cinema 4D, Houdini. Like these are some softwares that allow you to think in 3D. And while you're building these 3D models, you'll also start to recognize the technical constraints. Like when you're building a button on a 2D screen, like an engineer is never going to tell you that we can't implement that button because it has a very high asset size. But in the 3D world, somebody will tell you like, hey, the 3D model is very big in terms of like the number of triangles that it has or the textures that it has, and you will have to simplify it, both in terms of textures but also in terms of models. So getting an understanding of like the 3D interactive nature, I recommend like Unity has pretty good tutorials online on how to build it. There's so coming to that, which is like also get a little bit familiar with Unity and Unreal as the game engines. There are there are a lot of new prototyping tools coming up that don't require coding. Even when you're using Unity and Unreal, Unreal has this visual programming language called Blueprint, and Unity has another visual programming language. I am blanking on the name for that, but that can get you very far in terms of getting a deep understanding of what's possible in the AR VR realm. Now, if you don't want to learn programming at all, I would recommend pair up with another AR VR developer or a game developer and work on 2 or 3 personal projects with them. And by the virtue of you going through that process, you'll start to understand a lot of technical constraints without even kind of knowing how to program. So that's kind of the base. Like I feel you would need at least those kinds of like those are the that's the knowledge you need to be able to design experiences that can get implemented. I like to think that uh, as a designer, whatever you design, the success of that design is only validated after you launch it. So if you're designing something that can't even be built, like that's not a good design, even though it might work in the constrained environment of our tools.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about even like because you mentioned these big two players in the tools area, right? That they must have a pretty robust library of because they're like very complicated tools, right? So they must have a pretty big library of tutorials. So you can just kind of take one tutorial a day after
Yeah.
work and just yeah, slowly and gradually learn more about this space and like what's possible or what's not. I like this strategy. I think it's a good tip. Not difficult to follow.
Yes, not difficult to follow. You need to spend a lot of time doing that. That's the only caveat. And then there are also other tools that Meta and Snapchat have released. So Snapchat has Lens Studio, and then Meta has Spark AR Studio. These two tools allow you to build experiences specifically for mobile, um, primarily face experiences like face filters, but they've also added functionality to create a rear camera experience as well. So you could potentially point at your room and have that room be transformed into some kind of different filter. Um, I would say exploring, I would suggest exploring them if you're mostly focused on mobile AR technologies.
Okay, this was like super insightful experts opinion and feedback and thoughts on how to start, and the really actionable tips on how you can do it. Like, it actually, it doesn't seem like it's a rocket science, at least how you can slowly start learning about this. And then obviously you'll learn how complicated this is, and it will be probably a roller coaster of like, oh, that's, I can do it, okay, that's too much, I can do it, that's too much, and so on. So, and that's probably a natural cycle of learning new technologies, especially when they change so often. And it looks like it's kind of, we get into this, we're now in the next phase, in the next wave of these tools and technologies development. So likely, I anticipate there will be some increase in the advancements in the upcoming years. So I think it's probably a good time to get on this ship and ride the wave on this, yeah, board if you're a surfer. Okay, last question. Last question, Mukul. If you didn't have to worry about money, what would you do?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I guess I would do two things. One is travel a lot more. I truly believe that learning about new cultures and traditions helps us become more aware of how we're living our life and how design and technology can have an impact on people from different backgrounds. And to be honest, it's a lot of fun as well. So that's one. And then another is that I believe a lot in nurturing brilliant minds to to tackle these increasingly global challenges that we're going to face, particularly around like how do we support a lot of people living on this finite planet with finite resources, a lot of challenges in medical and healthcare, and the way to solve that in my mind is if we are able to create a technology that provides us instant or close to instant learning. So you all might be familiar with how Trinity in Matrix learns to fly a helicopter in like less than 2 seconds by just downloading all of that data in her brain. If we have that kind of technology, and I believe some combination of AR, VR, and AI can get us there or close to there, I would be working on that as a ambitious vision for the future, and I truly believe we could get there in our lifetimes.
Very interesting, especially the second one. The first one is obvious. Looking at your background with the map and what looks like a bunch of time zones. uh, yeah, and the second one is very, I would say, inspiring. Yeah, especially like remembering that scene is like really wow effect of like, is it even possible? And now, like with every next new development, every next new device or technology improvement, right? Especially with like recent AI, uh, um, blazing fast advancements, it's it could be possible. Yeah, it's kind of, it's not really that science fiction anymore. This idea, right, of the like almost
Yep.
instant learning of something new. I wonder what like what this, if this happens, what will this, how will this change all the really kind of the job market if everyone can learn anything, and instead of this kind of endless number of competition in the world, like now you have like a set of like just a segment of audience, right, of the job market, who is like in the same field, in the same kind of profession, the same kind of experience and skills. But now like you have billions of people who can do the same job, potentially even better. So I wonder how it will change the landscape then, if knowledge is so accessible.
I think that in that world, we also have to think about what does a global economy look like? Like, do people even have to work at that point? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe robots are doing all the jobs for us, and we're just lounging around on our sofas, watching
In
watching
space.
something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In our VR sets, yeah. Yeah, reminds me of this of the movie that we were rewatching with family recently, Wally, when
Wally.
like yeah, it's like scary future about what technology can do to save the population, right? And yeah, minimize all the stress and hardships. Yeah, interesting, awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks again for coming, Mukul. This was really valuable, even like for me, because I was really curious to learn about this world of AR and VR. So really appreciate you sharing all the insights from the inside and sharing all the wisdom, tips, and tricks and advice with the audience as well. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise, thanks a lot for the invitation, Kirill. I had a very knowledgeable discussion as well in the sense like when people ask me certain kinds of questions, it helps me kind of put my thoughts in some order to be able to answer that. And I always learn when talking to somebody who's not familiar with this.
Yeah, I know how it feels. Some things maybe obvious to you, but like when a question is asked that it kind of makes you really ponder, actually, yeah, and kind of collect your thoughts. That definitely has some value as well. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And wish you a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot.